As a former Green Beret with 2 combat tours myself, I know a little something about the attempt at nation building. So let's look at Afghanistan. After 20 years of combat, $2 trillion spent, thousands of lives lost, Afghanistan fell in 2 weeks. What the actual hell? Now, it's easy enough to imagine that with enough good intentions, money, and of course firepower, one can remake the world in their own image. And yet, time and time again, similar lessons need to be relearned at great expense. Now, some will look at examples such as Germany and Japan post-World War II, or perhaps South Korea, and conclude that with enough resources, a former enemy or war-torn ally can become a prosperous, stable, and even a flourishing democracy. But as they say, correlation does not always equal causation. Germany, Japan, and South Korea all had certain characteristics that made the long-term effort of nation building in these countries unique. They had a common history, a common national objective, a common enemy, and a long-term multi-generational effort. And even then, there are no guarantees. So let's take Japan. Certainly had a common history, it had been a nation for over 1,000 years. Germany had a common objective of recovering from the devastation of World War II. And South Korea, just like Germany and Japan, had a common unifying force, namely opposition to a communist threat. What's more, all 3 of these nations saw multi-generational efforts to rebuild from the war, establish representative democracy, and adapt free market economies. Now let's take all this experience and look at Afghanistan. Does it have a common history? Not really. Afghanistan's borders don't just encompass multiple ethnicities and cultures, they also cut through those ethnicities. What about a common goal? Not at all. Uzbeks and Tajiks in the north have a completely different interest from Pashtuns in the south. A common enemy? Hardly. Afghanistan has actually been fighting an eternal civil war for over 40 years. What about long-term multi-generational effort? Well, the United States was there for 20 years, so essentially we fell 2 generations short. The bottom line is that nation building is not impossible, but rather that it requires certain very specific preconditions and a great deal of long-term commitment to succeed. So before you go running headlong into creating the world anew for a bunch of people that might not be interested in your plans, maybe we should take some guidance from history before committing our own sons and daughters to a long-term war. Now, there are those that will always say it's worth the risk. Some might even argue that nation building is actually good for our economy. But take it from someone who's been to war twice, that's me, it isn't. In fact, we made a video about that, which you can watch right here.